Good afternoon. I'm Zeyno Dodd. I'm a R&D engineer, and I'm here to hopefully give you some exciting results on, no, not that exciting, but some promising results on recent experimentation I've been doing with leveraging generative AI and more sort of deterministic knowledge graph-based inference in basically modeling a AI agent. And this will be kind of in the domain of cybersecurity compliance. Well, this is experimentation, but through various collaborations, we actually attempt to create agents or agentic workflow solutions that can address public sector problems. Like one of the collaborations, it's with Agency 5150. So very quickly going over the agenda, just going to talk a little bit about the background, but I think there was a lot of talk about the background, so I'm not going to add much. I'm going to skim through it. I will basically highlight what I thought would be something challenging to test, which is the recent release of HIPAA security rule updates. And I'm going to talk about how we can sort of model our agent, SME subject matter expert agent, and basically look at the proof of concept a little bit. It's a very primitive one, but it basically lays out some of the core concepts that can be implemented in an agentic sort of framework, platform, or toolkit. And then hopefully we'll go through the findings before I talk too much. Problem landscape, basically the cybersecurity problem space is evolving. There's always new threats, and we've been talking about this. There's one contributor is obviously very fast evolving technology. AI is there, great potential, but also kind of expanding on threat landscape also, basically bringing opportunities for exploitation. So there's the standards that used to work on almost like getting updates on every 5 years or like on a decade. In the case of NIST Cybersecurity framework, it got the latest update back in February 2024 after 10 years. And then there is some other, obviously, this is the national NIST standard framework that relies on the prior standards. And then there's some other ones, kind of non-profit institutions, organizations who bring together some domain expert SMEs that put a lot of effort. They go through reviews. It's a long cycle, and then they do certain types of mappings, use different kind of approaches to tie controls and provisions in certain aspects of the framework on one end to something else. Like, for instance, they did that for CSF version 1.1, looked at HIPAA security rule, and they did some implementation very specific using their own sort of NIST standard language, how they would implement something that is written in a slightly different language. So it's a very difficult thing to start with because the evolution is like much faster now. It's kind of dizzying. And at the same time, there's the recent cuts that happened in R&D in workforces, including, for instance, the one that I kind of referred to, CIS, Center of Information Security, got a pretty major funding cut, so they're basically reducing down on their activities and framework definitions. Same with, I think, NIST. They basically had they were trying to catch up and trying to provide the mappings themselves. That didn't quite, that's a long cycle, so they decided to facilitate some online information referencing tool or some platform that would allow SMEs to submit their own mappings as how they understand one standard maps to another. But that's also pretty slow. But at least it's I think it's a great idea. It allows many different folks to come on board and submit, and it goes to a public review, and you have that data, that mapping, that reasoning available as a publicly available data and intelligence. So I picked HIPAA because it's very recent, and I wanted to see what I can do for a LLM that's been trained 6 months ago how is it going to deal with this brand new update from 2025? And I also kind of, basically, I will take core as CSF 2.0 because the agencies, whoever contracting with the agencies, federal, state, and whoever is a third-party sort of provider, service provider, they will be required to be compliant pretty soon. And especially in the healthcare, it's going to be a little bit of a extension because HIPAA will be relevant. I mean, what changed that I have to update my controls, my procedures, my policies? What changed between what I had moving from CSF 1.1 to 2? So they will have to hire a lot of folks to do the work, and there's a shortage of SMEs, as I said. So what if we had an SME agent? Not necessarily to get rid of the SMEs, but we can assist them, right? We can speed up the process. And we can basically, I imagined, yes, we take advantage of LLM, and in basically the sort of augmented with the knowledge graph, give it some kind of sort of richness in giving, through RAG, giving some embeddings to improve the sort of prompt, enhance the prompt. But at the same time, it would be nice to test. That's a generative kind of approach of inference. What if I had something more deterministic? Something that is more categorical, an inference that would kind of a little bit different, and how can they collaborate together? So I had some hypotheses about how they would cooperate or collaborate, and I was totally wrong. But again, it's in a good way, they kind of collaborated. So while doing this, I'd also try to sort of stick to anything that is accessible so people can take that and then sort of use the sort of baseline code I provided, the data that I provided, which is already available, but I didn't provide the pipeline, processing pipeline. That's a fairly easy thing to do with all the open source tooling out there, but just to test the idea. I also limited my set to only a subset of standards, because if I put all the standards there, probably it would take me, because I'm doing it by myself, several months to do this. But I took the core ones, the most recent updates to basically from CIS, SCF. These are all relevant security frameworks, cybersecurity frameworks. I excluded certain things because they're already implied and implemented by, for instance, SP 866R2 is an implementation of how you would address the HIPAA's security rules. And again, as I said, I used pretty much anything I can get. The community edition so that I can test my idea. So the agent itself is, it's very primitive workflow. It can be extended. It can be just one kind of workflow where it just does a sequence and comes back. But it can have multiple agents. We can have different sort of inferences or different experts focusing on different areas, and they can have a negotiation. So this is a very simple triage, basically two-step process where first I augment a prompt using my knowledge graph, and I get some basically hopefully relevant answers in terms of, okay, I have my sort of control domain where I basically consider myself compliant, but what will be affected in terms of security rule with this upcoming change? So when I ask this question in a structured manner, it's basically with an augmented question, it will basically know about what changed in the most recent rule. So it came back, and then I was thinking, hey, I can also use this deterministic logic to narrow it down. If there's hallucinations, I can deal with it. So that was the other kind of idea. So it's like a two-step process. It says very simple triage. You can also imagine human-in-the-loop scenarios for this, so it doesn't have to be, this is just to show the sort of concept. And it was interesting because, yes, they collaborated, as I said, but instead of seeing the LLM creating a lot of mappings, a lot of sort of projections into the future in terms of these sections, these subsections will be relevant, it was actually pretty shy, and I was surprised. It gave me some good sort of explanation compared to the plain old chat when I gave the embeddings with the RAG. So it gave me some decent rationale as to the, what's relevant with the recent updates. Having said that, obviously you cannot, with the model I used, you cannot sort of dig down and trace back to the original authority. So whereas I did a very simple graph traversal, K-neighborhood, and I got far more. Like, I mean, they overlapped in about 20 to 30% of what they saw as potential extensions in terms of HIPAA compliance. But then again, it was, I was honestly surprised. And in fact, I could use some of the relevance factors to sort of, embedded the semantic knowledge coming from the LLM's response to maybe weigh some of the extra projections and then make it a more triaged answer. Then I actually kind of thought about it. It makes sense because the domain experts, they don't go by text. LLM is more about certain patterns. And in the embeddings, yes, there's some semantic knowledge encoded. But a lot of these kind of decisions that subject matter experts do, they think about specific domain. It's a categorical decision. They map things not because they describe them the same way. So actually, it makes in a certain way, it makes a lot of sense. And it really enriches the inference. Well, it kind of showed that way. But long story short, I think this actually is promising because it can reduce the sort of, there's still constraints. And I'm not going to claim that it's like completely future-proofing. But at least it's a proactive approach. And you can get prepared and sort of identify certain risk areas and address them in advance. And that you can do, you can either sort of, whoever you have as SME, you can supplement them with that, or you can basically write up tooling that would assist the SMEs, or anybody who's in the governance analytics type role, or you can, the most important thing, this can be part of open collaboration as well. As I was listening to the open standards, I was actually kind of excited, the community-based standard development. Imagine contributing, in a way, the OLIR project does, to these kind of mappings, to build that knowledge graph, the knowledge knowledge-based inference that could be extremely useful for various kinds of compliance scenarios. All right, I think I stayed in time, so I can have questions if you have any. Yes?
How much did the accuracy improve after using KG?
So the baseline was basically 5% overlap. With the KG, it bumped it up to maybe 20%. And with after that, after the inference, augmentation with the graph traversal, I managed to get like a higher sort of agreement between these two answers. The other thing is, I mean, sometimes the LLM looks at it in a more generic way. It kind of thinks that, OK, these two are related. But the categorical one goes all the way down in the hierarchy of sections. So it's much more powerful, obviously. You would take that instead of what LLM gives you. But overall, they agree on the areas, obviously, because of the way things are described and because it got like the baseline information.
Quick extension on the same question.
Yeah.
If you can share some of the learnings from implementing knowledge graph, some of the do's and don'ts that might be used. Thank you.
Yeah. So for instance, one thing I noticed, you can use vector databases, but if you have your knowledge graph, it's kind of good to keep your embeddings within the graph database. I mean, I don't want to pitch for the Neo4j, but it's extremely useful to be able to keep it in the node domain. So all my categories and everything, I think that forms a semantic network, right? That's really helpful, keeping those two things together, basically. It's very kind of useful. The other thing I would say, it can get very complicated. Building the, for efficient traversal, I think you have to basically decide, and you should not take anything and everything. So there's a original vetting of what kind of resources that you can take into your knowledge graph. And that depends on the problem context. So in this case, I thought, hey, I'll start with these 5 because but if I had to put everything, I don't think I would get out of that knowledge graph. Hope this answers.